So we're doing the webcast around the idea of sort of person agnostic in terms of like industry, more about folks that are sort of driven or impassioned or doing things in the city, kind of hyper New Orleans oriented.
Okay.
And you're a passionate New Orleans oriented human.
True. I appreciate that.
Cool. Would you, I guess what I forgot to do last time was have the other person introduce themselves. I know you as the great runner of New Orleans, the youth runner, the Run Youth NOLA-er.
Mm-hmm.
Who are you?
Thanks, Rob. I'm Denali Lander. I'm the executive director of Youth Run NOLA. And so, yes, a runner, fan of young people, champion of kids, I would say. Former teacher, happy to be in New Orleans doing what I do with the people that I get to do it with.
How long have you been like affiliated with Youth Run?
I have been affiliated with Youth Run NOLA since the first Youth Run NOLA practice.
When was that?
Which was in November of 2010. So there are two wonderful people who started Youth Run NOLA, knowing about one of my friends knew about a program in Los Angeles called Students Run LA. And cool. She was training for the Crescent City Classic one year, and some of her students were asking her what she was training for, why she was running, could they train with her. So she had a small group of kids do the Crescent City Classic with her. The following fall, she was like, let's actually turn this
into a thing.
And so she taught at Chalmette High, sent out kind of this message of like, does anybody want to run with students? Because I think I'm going to start doing this thing after school. So I worked at the alternative school down the road from Chalmette High.
Okay.
All of my students had been expelled from either the other middle schools or the high school in St. Bernard Parish. And when they got expelled, they also got expelled from the opportunity to have any kind of extracurricular stuff, any other programming, that type of thing.
So the school had zero, like nothing. Like you went, you sat in a room, somebody gave you math, and then you went home.
Yeah, I gave English to whatever degree. First and second year teachers can do that. And then kids went home.
Wow.
It was not the happiest place. And certainly when I was in school, like it was the sports that I was doing, student council, that kind of stuff that got me so excited about school and what I was there for learning in school. But it was that's like where I felt I belonged, was any of that extracurricular stuff. Mm-hmm. So I thought like, hey, maybe this is like a way of creating some opportunity for the students at our school of this like walking and jogging club. Yeah. It was super grassroots at the beginning, like we met at the track behind Chalmette High. There were 5 of us teachers who responded to that, like anyone interested. There was one student in particular that I was like, if I can get Kishonda to come to this with me, maybe that will help what had been like a bit of like in the classroom butting of heads.
Yeah.
And I was like, let's get us outside. It's like, do you want to come to this thing with Mickey Shonda? It's like this running thing. I didn't even know like what I was explaining because
come to this thing.
Come to this thing.
It's at the track behind the school.
We're gonna meet at the school. It's gonna be a thing that we do. She came, and that's became like practice 2 times a week. Started putting on like small events, like had one that spring, like bussed all the kids to Audubon Park to like experience running there.
Just organically.
And then we actually became a project of the Young Leadership Council. So the founders, Andre Feidler and Alex Lebo, kind of pitched to the Young Leadership Council, like, could we be a project of yours? So we became a project of theirs. That was super helpful with like initial like incubation, basically, like initial funding, initial volunteers, initial idea of like how do you actually do this, because we were all teachers. And so then we had this run in Audubon Park, and we had like 45 kids do the Crescent City Classic that year.
And that was the biggest
that was like
biggest event that Youth Run had ever
biggest
had.
event that we'd ever had. Yeah, so it was like the whole year was like leading up towards the Crescent City Classic. And so that was the spring of 2011. And that was my second year of teaching. And so I kept teaching in St. Bernard, and had thought I was going to be a teacher forever. Like when I was in high school, I was like, I want to be a teacher. My mom was a teacher. My dad's a professor. So I think education is just sort
It's
of
you.
in there, in me.
An academic human.
An academic human. And I loved school. So so I was like, I'm going to be a teacher forever. When I was at Tulane, I was like, most of the things that I did outside of school were like working at public schools around Tulane, or I worked at a high school downtown, and I was like, I want to teach here.
So you've always been involved in education somewhere in your life.
Yeah. Yep.
So tell me, you mentioned that when you were doing that initial like meeting behind the track, that there was a particular student who you were trying to connect with.
Yeah.
What's the deal with that? Like, was this you trying to have you're just like, you're in the classroom, you're frustrated that you're a second year teacher. I imagine that you're not like the greatest teacher of all time 2 years in.
Fair. That's fair.
Was it like, what were you figuring out about yourself that like had you use this as a tool to connect with?
Yeah. I mean, it's like hard to separate, or like I have so much hindsight now, 8 years later to like be able to identify what was happening. I don't know if at the time how conscious of it I was, but recognizing that there's this tension that I was feeling by being in this position of authority by name as like the teacher in the classroom, that there's this really strong dichotomy of like teacher versus students, and that supposedly I was the one doing the education, but was at the time very conscious and can look back and be like, I was learning a profound amount from my students about the world, about poverty, about racism, about injustice, like all of these things. That was my first like real life exposure to a lot of this. And was just uncomfortable with this idea of like, yet somehow I'm the person with power in this situation. So I taught in St. Bernard for 3 years, and then I transitioned and taught at a charter school in New Orleans, and was realizing like on the side all of my extra time was spent learning about or thinking about how to build a nonprofit, how eventually became a nonprofit in the spring of 2012. So we we're incredibly grateful for like the roots that the YLC helped us build, and then recognize that like now we're in a position to actually try and do this as an independent nonprofit.
So what year did it really become its own thing?
2012. So the spring going into the summer of 2012. So we'd had 2 years of programming. And so we were like forming a board and learning about fundraising and all that I was like getting really interested in this. At the same time I'd been like, I'm going to be a teacher forever. Then of course now looking back and be like, well, this issue of like still being this ratio of like one person in front of 30 students, being the bearer of the knowledge or whatever, wasn't sitting right. And also, so I grew up in Colorado. I basically grew up running around in the mountains, and can look back.
It was not my childhood as a Midwesterner.
Right? It's amazing to think about like how much that actually influenced who I am in terms of like my appreciation and prioritization of health, my connection with nature, my like didn't need to be outside. And like this is the thing that my family did a lot of times together. Sometimes it was just that my brother and I would go out, or and have realized that like that what I immediately loved from this first Youth Run NOLA practice, and having the opportunity to run with Kishonda, and I met another young woman from the high school named Sherelle at the first practice, and this this idea of the side-by-side activity that is
Sure.
walking and jogging and running, like sort of very unexpectedly struck me as like, oh, this is something that is missing from my hours during the classroom time.
Because it was such a sort of imposed environment, was it? Because the classroom is a really, I've shared the experience that you've shared of coming to the city through education and then being thrust into an environment where, hey, here's 120 people that you're gonna experience every single day.
Totally.
You're 22 years old. You're responsible for them now.
You pretty much know everything, right?
And P.S. like these are folks who require a serious amount of sensitivity over and above what you could throw any other first year teacher into.
Yeah.
So we were underqualified, underexperienced in environments that had more pressing needs that were unfamiliar. And what you're articulating, this feeling of like, what? Like, I have no qualification here.
Exactly.
I definitely felt when I got to New Orleans as a Chicago North Suburban Jewish kid who was now in an urban environment in the Deep South, in a place where I didn't know anything about the culture and could see the differences that existed from where I grew up, but had no idea how to navigate them in a way that was sensitive and thoughtful and respectful to everyone, and felt very like thrust into this weird power dynamic, this super weird power dynamic of you must educate kids, and you're kind of sitting there like, well, I don't even know what I'm doing.
Yeah, knowing that like I'm not the best person to be doing this.
Exactly.
And I don't have the context, I don't have the connections, I don't have the experiences or background to be the best person to do this. And that's like so I was experiencing all that and then recognizing, but when Sherelle and I start running together, like very different stories on paper. Like she grew up in Chalmette, she has like little brothers that she's taking care of. She's defying a lot of trauma she's experienced to graduate high school. Like this incredibly just this like little ball of light and like brilliance. And when we start running together, it's like we're facing the same challenge. Like there's this incredibly equalizing power of physical activity that is like, now 8 years later, whatever, I'm like, if everyone would just go for a walk or a jog with someone different from them for 30 minutes, it's like very difficult at the end of that 30 minutes to not feel connected to that person, because it's like
Interesting.
You've shared some kind of challenge together. No matter how experienced you are with running, or like you are going to be breathing hard, you are going to be thinking about like, oh, how much longer am I going to do this? Oh, it's hot, oh, I'm sweaty. Like those are shared experiences that you can't get past. Like automatically you're experiencing something that makes you have something in common with another person. And so for me and Sherelle, who that first year, I met her at the first practice, we got to know one another, she did the Crescent City Classic. That's what her freshman year of high school. Keshonda and she got through the whole season, we did the Crescent City Classic together. She kept going. She eventually left the alternative school to go back to like regular education school. She and I ran 6 Crescent City Classics consecutively together, and then she graduated high school. And Sherelle and I ran the first time Youth Run NOLA decided to take on a half marathon as like our new, seemingly impossible distance. Like there's something really powerful about this idea that like, when you set a goal with someone that feels impossible and you set that goal together, again, that bond is like you can't evade that bond.
You're a team.
You're a team. Yeah. And it's very different than in the classroom when it's like, when I was helping young people read, it's like we're setting a goal for their improvement and their self-growth. But like they know that I'm not in the same position as them.
Sure.
Like, so I can't truly understand what challenges they're up or what they're experiencing. So when we can apply this, like, let's all train for a half marathon, it's like, we all have to put in the hours together. We all have to log the miles together. Like, I ran my first half marathon at the same time that Cheryl was running her first half marathon.
Oh, no kidding.
We're both super scared. Like, I'm like, I don't know if I can do this. She's like, well, I don't know if I can do this. So, like, so to have that very genuine experience of like, this is a new thing for me. This is a new challenge. And like I was saying before, like, and no matter what, even if I've run before, like, every time it requires self-motivation, it requires determination, it requires putting one foot in front of the other, and doing that side by side with someone totally breaks down whatever dynamics there are with like adult, kid, like age dynamics, age, race dynamics. Like, we're trying to just build this equalizing opportunity. And so I became like consumed by this as like, this is much more where I'm feeling like I actually do belong, like I actually am building relationships, I am finding success, I am the right person to be doing this, which were things that I was not necessarily feeling as a classroom teacher. And we were, facing this moment of like, is Youth Run NOLA going to continue to be this like volunteer or like AmeriCorps run nonprofit after school program that kind of plateaus but like continues in this like grassroots way, or is this, we've built so much traction and kids want more of this, teachers want more of this, families want more of this, like, should we actually become a nonprofit that is like, has a staff and everything? So
do you legitimize?
Do we really, fully lean into this?
So how has your, and I think you kind of hit on it, this really interesting philosophy of how people build empathy for each other. And it's this idea of, instead of these fabricated environments, you built an environment where everyone who was participating was allowed to engage and learn from each other. Do you have like a philosophy, or do you have like a set of guiding principles that can articulate just how that growth has happened and how you look at things now versus that like 22-year-old kid who was like, do you want to meet me by the track?
Totally.
Just because you're trying to resolve this inner sense of like, this isn't quite how I want our relationship to be.
Well, I think there are a lot of things that I can look back and be like, oh, I kind of stumbled into that. Running is at the time I was like, makes the most sense, of course, that like Andre and Alex were choosing running because she'd been training with the Crescent City Classic and it's the cheapest sport. Like, for all reasons, it should be the most accessible. Like, if you are blessed with like the able body to be able to put one foot in front of the other, like, you can do this. Like, good shoes are really important for doing it healthily and safely. But in terms of like, I mean, youth lacrosse NOLA would be like mad expensive, and we were teachers, so like that wasn't gonna happen.
A $500 buy-in.
It's like, and that from the very beginning, like 6-minute mile to 20-minute mile. Like, come do this. Everything. No matter if you're gonna walk the whole thing and your goal is to walk a little bit faster or to walk a little bit farther, or if you're thinking about like, actually I kind of feel like I have natural talent for this, like maybe running could be an access point to college. Like, wherever you are with running and walking, like, open for everyone. So that meant like really beautiful things in terms of just kids who had either been like turned off from competitive sports for the competitive side, or just been like, oh, I don't belong, like that's not my thing, like I'm not into athletics, I'm not into sports. But like within human nature is this desire to belong. So that's like one thing that I think we've really learned, is that like, whether it's the reason why a kid gets involved, or a family, or a teacher, or a community member who wants to volunteer, it's because some part of them is like looking to belong to something. Because that's so great. Like, to be like, oh, these people want me here. I'm loved by these people. I'm cared for, and I'm successful. I'm like finding success at it. So everybody gets excited about that.
That's a lot of parties. And
great.
It's funny because I hadn't even thought of, because now if folks are familiar with Youth Run, there's this, in their minds, if they've ever been to a race that Youth Run is at, they're going to see hundreds of kids, hundreds of adults, all sorts of colors and bandanas and T-shirts and exuberance, and they're getting off of buses and they're assembling in groups and they're engaging with each other and they're stretching and they're celebrating and there's this whole protocol to it. How has it extended beyond the students? Because what you're describing now is so much more of a community organization than simply a student organization.
Totally. Yeah. And I think like that's probably been another phase of like this idea of running as an empathy building tool, which is like, at the time of being a teacher, I was like, oh, this is a youth development organization. That's like all I really care about.
Sure.
It's like that it's a program that is like designed with the goals of kids, like these kids who were like, I want to run a 10K. And it's like, oh, cool, I wonder if any other kids want to run a 10K. And then all these other kids did. And realizing in the past years of like layering on that, it's like, oh, well, actually, this is also a community health organization.
Sure.
Like, now that I'm doing this full time and like have that incredible good fortune to like have this be my job, it's like I've been learning so much more about just like the health disparities that are facing different communities in New Orleans and like how health outcomes and life expectancy is like so in line with lines of class and lines of race in the city that it's like there's also this real urgency about ensuring community health and supporting community health. So we're like this overlapping, and then we're also this like mentorship program of sorts that it's like what we have found. And this was like another kind of organic thing that we just stumbled in was like, at the time of teachers founding this, like all of our teacher friends were like, oh, that's cool, like I'll come run with you on a Saturday. Like when we had that first run in Ottoman Park, it's like, we knew we were bringing about 30 kids and there were 5 of us. We were like, for safety, we probably should have a few more adults. And there's all these other, like within our own network of people like, oh yeah, I want to come do that. And so the growth has been like realizing like, okay, so at the school level, when we have practices at schools, like the teachers continue to be the coaches. But now the way that the program design is that once a month, like you're describing, all these hundreds of kids come together to do a community race, whether it's a 5K or a 10K or the half marathon. And so we try and get it much closer to like 1-to-1 or like maybe one adult with 2 kids for the sake of like having as many people experience this side-by-side power of relationship building. And like share a challenge. And that I sort of get like obsessed about this like micro moment of the moments right before the start of a race.
Sure.
Where it's like all these people corralled in this one spot, like literally facing the exact same challenge. And it's like you immediately have this like bond with hundreds and thousands of people. And so like if we can just keep recreating that, it's like then we can actually have this community level impact. So right now what we're thinking a lot more about is like we're always going to have the school-based program where it's like teachers running with students. That's really powerful. Teachers are phenomenal when it comes to like thinking about kids first. This is a non-competitive program, so teachers don't enter this being like, you gotta run faster. You got like it's not about
teacher
that.
before
it's
coach.
Teacher before coach, and therefore it's like child and student before runner. Like the whole thing is like about caring for one another. And so like that's always going to be a primary initiative of the organization. But what we've added now is like these Saturday morning park-based program where it's like from the beginning when we had kids training for the half marathon, like me and Sherelle that first year we would meet at the Shawmut Battlefield every Saturday morning for 4 months before running the actual half marathon. And so now we have about 6 regional parks where kids are training for the half marathon. And what finally kind of like struck us was like, oh duh, like if kids are coming to the park closest in their neighborhood to train for a half marathon, like building up 7 miles, then 8, then 9, and we've recruited all of these community members to train with them side by side, let's also just create space for family members to train for the 504K, which is our annual 5K fundraiser. So it's like, hey, while your kid is logging 8 miles, like, why don't you do this couch to 5K training program with us, where it's like, maybe before, like, walking a mile seemed like totally impossible thing to a family member, but it's like, come every Saturday, and we'll get you there. Like, we'll jog for 30 seconds and then walk for 2 minutes, and we'll jog for 30, kind of like build out that accessibility component.
With youth run coaches, with the teachers who...
Yeah, and with all these community members, that it's like, so that's where we become like really emphasis on like the community side of community health. Is it's like, when we talk, I'm super tight with these people that are like doing a running program in Chicago called Chicago Run, or these people in Philly doing Students Run Philly style, or like have connected with the people at Students Run LA. And when you're talking about a city like Chicago, LA, Boston, Philly, it's like community building is way harder than the city size of New Orleans. Like, maybe they can do like neighborhood community building, but it's like we're getting to a place where like thinking about years ahead, it's like we could actually be talking about like pulling kids from all neighborhoods to come together for these races, or like having park-based programming in all neighborhoods that families can go to. And so the 504K has really become this like day that represents community and a run for everyone, that it's like we'll send 12 buses around the city to pick up anybody who will come to the event, and then it's like this is a thing where we're all going to do this 3.1 miles together, no matter what pace you are, and recognizing that like it's also within our responsibility and capacity to help people train for that. Like, you can't assume that everyone can do a 5K. Like, we want to make sure that if we're encouraging kids to be a part, then let's get their families to train up for that.
Somebody has to, It's funny because Oli always says when we sit down and spend 45 minutes looking at something that we're like, oh, duh, that's how we should do it.
Totally.
Like, it's intuitive, but it's not obvious.
Yeah.
And you sort of come to it and you're like, well, duh, now we can do that.
Yeah.
But it wasn't obvious, 6 months prior. How do you as the person who is the executive director, right, spearheading the organization, the fearless leader, how do you navigate something that is so community oriented with the like excitement and the passion that you bring just individually and the things that you would like to see kind of roll out?
Well, like, I'm a white person, not from New Orleans, who's a Tulane grad and a TFA alumni.
Okay.
And those are like all things that I have to actively undo in the Youth Run NOLA experience. And we were started by 5 white Teach for America teachers.
What does that mean, actively undo?
Like, if we're going to be a community-based organization, that, like, the language of that is that the work of the organization is driven by the community itself. And I'm not an original community member. So I think, like, and neither were any of the 5 people who founded this organization, myself included. So what we're getting to a place now is like we've built out more non-running programming. That it's like we have this team of high schoolers who are on our captain's council, which is like a student council for Youth Run NOLA, that then share with us like and initiate what should it look like on the day of the 504K. What should the planning look like? Who else should we be including? What should the run of show look like? And so that then those kids are the future leaders, hopefully future executive director of the organization itself. That it's like, so now my approach to staffing is about like, how do we ensure that people who work for the organization reflect the kids in the organization? How do we ensure that the volunteers and the team members of the organization reflect the kids of the organization? And for a long time it was like, well, I can't do that. Like, I have gotten to this place where the organization is sustainable, and we're in a place where it's like, now we know that this isn't just an after school club. Like, there's huge potential here, and kids are responding super well and want more and want to now train for a full marathon, for example. So like the need and the interest is always there. And it's about, kind of for me, I think learning like, what is my place in this organization, and ensuring that the voices that actually guide the design of the program and the initiatives of the program
Mm-hmm.
is not a reflection of me, is a reflection of the kids and their families.
It's a true community organization, like you say.
And that's a process. Like the relying on school partnerships, where in, of course, the charter school system, there's a lot of transiency. There's a lot of people that are coming in and out of the city.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been the story of a lot of our coaches as well. But in order to actually be, that's where I get most excited about these park-based programs, that it's like the kids themselves are the catalysts for getting their neighbors and their family members to come to the park with them. The kids actually lead this. They are the site captains at the Saturday morning training programs. And it's like, you do this. Like you, Averett, who lives in New Orleans East, like
mm-hmm.
at Joe Brown Park, like bring all of your community members and lead the running and the walking within your own neighborhood.
Sure.
And it can be my role to help leverage the connections and the privilege that I have to bring in more resources to support that, but that like in the actual program, delivering the program design, that's up to other people.
Sure.
Yeah.
So that's hard.
Yeah.
That's really hard, especially, so as an organizational leader, I imagine you've often felt this idea where you've woke up one morning, something has been running, and then you've kind of looked and gone, wait, what do I do here?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a weird play on the ego and your sense of self or value in your organization. And what you described is so interesting, because you say that it seems that you have a really clear idea of these are the things that if we're going to make good on this idea of being a community organization, I know I can't do.
Mm-hmm.
And I also know that I do play an important role.
Yeah.
So what is your role now? What is it becoming? Because it's not you're not Napoleon Bonaparte on the horse saying like, here we go. You're serving a very particular role
mm-hmm.
that has taken you years to craft.
Yeah.
What is that? Like, how do you see yourself in this community organization?
Mm-hmm. I see my role as a white person constantly carrying white privilege to leverage the resources that I have access to because of my existence in like white mainstream culture. So like I have a role of fundraising. I have a role of like awareness building. I'm by nature, like a lot of my strengths are about strategic planning and strategic thinking. Mm-hmm. So like I think a lot about the vision and how to hear what people are saying, kids and families and our other staff members hear what they're saying about like the desired next steps, and then like organize that. And I think I'm still like I still think of myself as like having a huge role as like kind of a motivator behind like the vision of it. Mm-hmm. So that it's like if we're trying to become a place that really supports its staff members and builds up leadership within the ranks and has pipelines, like I want to be like behind the scenes, like encouraging that development, encouraging that growth.
Sure. But not necessarily main staged.
Right.
This is me champion the. So how do you? It sounds like it's important to you to understand in the positionality, like obviously what you bring to the city, but also elements of like race and socioeconomics. Mm-hmm. How do you talk about that proactively in Youth Run NOLA? Because mm-hmm. it's so hard to engage in anything that even remotely resembles like a public conversation about just who we are as towns and cities, you know, forgetting about who we are as a country even.
Yeah.
But it seems like it's something that you've thought a lot about, and I can imagine that there are conversations that happen in the leadership in the community. How do you foster that sense of community and make sure that those conversations happen productively?
Right. I mean, so distance running, at least in the United States, has become this very like upper middle class white sport where you have to have the right watch and the right shoes and the right equipment and the right moisture wicking fabrics and stuff. And so from the beginning, recognizing that like that's not the students that we're working with. 82% of the kids in the program are Black. most of them are growing up in neighborhoods that have predominantly lower income communities or people living in them and facing all kinds of challenge, a profound and overwhelming amount of trauma. And so recognizing that like what we're actually trying to do is ensure that there is greater inclusion and greater diversity within the sport of distance running in the city. And in order for this to actually become like a lifelong habit, it's super important, much like it's really important for kids of color to have teachers of color or to have leaders of color within programs that they're working on. It's the same thing for us. Like if I'm the only running coach that a kid of color has, I don't feel confident that running is actually something that they will identify with as part of their community, because it could be, and if their principal's also white and their teachers are also white, like running will just be another thing that they can code switch into.
Interesting.
Versus like if we can actually have staff like representation truly matters, and if we can have staff members who represent the backgrounds, have a shared, like visually look the same as the majority of the kids in the program.
Sure.
And we can do our part in recruiting community members to volunteer with us who share the experiences of the kids in the program, who look like the kids in the program. That's where I think we actually see progression forward of like kids identifying that this is something that I could be doing lifelong.
Have you been able to do that thus far?
It's hard. We're working on it. That's where I use that word undo. It's like our network from the beginning was the network of 5 white transplants in the city. So
sure.
It's like that's what we have to undo. So we do a lot of equity training and learning and constantly trying to understand our role in that. And so I think like this year it's it's like everything from like our communications, how we like right now I'm exploring my role of like what is my role in terms of a thought partner of the other white volunteers of the organization for us to best understand like what's our best fit with kids or what's our best place in this organization, while we're simultaneously always trying to recruit more people of color to be walking and jogging and running with especially the kids of color within the program. But it's a daily thing to think about, and it has everything to do with like the language on our website, the language that's coming out of our mouth, the conversations that I'm having with funders. Like we're really trying to make sure that this is a shift for the whole organization.
That's a big conversation to have. And how many individuals are you sort of speaking to in this community now? So how many folks are on staff? How many folks are in your coaching community? How many folks are as active parents? How many folks are as active students?
So this is the first year we have 4 full-time staff members. So it's getting bigger each year, which is great. And there's like a lot of pride that I take in that of helping to have gone from like a volunteer run organization to an organization where we're able to provide, at least in the world of like community-based nonprofits, like a competitive salary for people and health insurance, and like I really want this to be like a place that is about staff development and a good place to work. So having 4 full-time staff is of course teeny tiny in the realm of like the world, but exciting for us and the progress that we've made, and capacity goes. We've had that staffing structure for now 2 months, but to see like what capacity is expanded by having full-time people. And we have about 60 teacher coaches who... At how many schools? About 30, right? Between 30 and 35. We're kind of finalizing that all right now as school's getting back in session. And then we work with about 400 kids and try and reach as many of their families as possible. And each year about 200 community members who join our team as volunteers of some sort. Ooh. So I don't know if you add that all up, like almost 700 people. Yeah. From that meetup behind Chalmette with 4 or 5 teachers and how many kids? 35 kids or so. Yeah. And that is like a really, one time I think it was last year or something, my board had me do this exercise of just like looking at some of those like key performance indicators of like just representing growth in various ways.
Sure.
And so to see like what's happened with those numbers, what's happened with the number of schools, what's the whole immersion of this park program, like full-time employees, all these like little indicators that it's like I quickly lose sight of that as someone who's been in it.
Because you're so just go, need to hit the numbers.
I'm thinking about this, like, why haven't we reached this yet? Like, why, like, and to have been thinking about something like that for 8 years, but then to actually pause and reflect on, like, yeah, it was, like, when I went to that first practice, I was, like, there to run with Kishonda, and I was like, that's what this is, that's what I'm doing. I'm here to run with this one person who I really believe in and want to have a good relationship with. And to see where we are now and like have that reflected back is very cool. And this has been like it's the only place that I've helped build a nonprofit in, but like the community support of just like, I mean, I was sort of trained to be a teacher. Like I wasn't even trained to be a teacher. Like I studied English and history in college. Like I didn't enter this with a lot of business skills.
Sure.
So to like have been exposed to just the learning that has been shared with me, and like people have been willing to sit down and teach me how to do everything. Not that I know how to do everything, like everything that I've learned to this point I've learned from other people and have still so much to go, and I just see like huge potential for this organization.
Well, you come to the work with such a sensitivity to both who you are, but also to the work that you want to do.
Yeah.
Like it's very interesting because it's almost like you're this bred educator who now has been thrown into the world of nonprofit, who's very much outside of the comfort zone of a college class or of a classroom, and you're starting to find the boundaries of what your what your work is.
Right.
So if you're the ED, you're the professor or the teacher like your dad or your mom, well, where do we stop?
Yeah.
We're building a community, but what is a community? Community isn't just in a classroom or on a college roll. It's not just the kids, it's the parents. Do you have those moments with your parents? Do they joke with you about kind of what you're doing? What's their take on it?
Well, it's so funny because when you worked for Youth Run NOLA, that was my first year.
Spoiler alert.
Being the executive director. So you have probably such an interesting perspective too of just like I had no idea what I was doing at that time, and
the best thing is that I didn't either.
Yeah, so we were just trying to figure it out, you know, our individual lives and the organization, all these things. My parents have been incredibly supportive and like understanding of what my attitude sometimes can be in a startup nonprofit. This is really hard. But they also have been able to see the perspective of like, I mean, I used to have like crazy amount of Sunday dread before teaching of just like this overwhelming anxiety. And particularly when I was working in the alternative school, like I was not in a place in my life where I was nearly strong enough to be faced with the amount of trauma that the kids in my classrooms were like. I just was not the best person to be doing that. And so now to see my family is like incredibly supportive to see that like I am in a position that I am because of my care for kids and like that's who I want to be around, and that I have found a way to work in a place that is like so aligned to my values, and that I'll always be a person that is like that work has to align with passion. And so my family is very supportive of that, and we're all spread out over the country, so I think that's like my parents are understanding to the fact that like where I grew up in like very, very white upper middle class Boulder, which I love, and like every time I go back there like feel like a sense of peace and a sense of like that. I mean, like I said, the connection to the mountains is like something that I could never replace, but also is like a complete lack of diversity, a complete lack of cultural richness that they know that it really matters to me here. And what's been so great about like being an executive director is like the whole thing, I thought I would hate the raising money, for example. Like I was very nervous about that. but the whole my whole job is about relationship building, which is so exciting to me.
It's
I
teaching.
love doing that. It's like connecting with people and aligning those connections and aligning those values around like shared support and shared outcomes. So it's
Yeah.
So
I think that's why people trust you, and I think that's what people like most about you.
Yeah.
Is that it's clear that you come to the work with a clear sense of both who you are as well as a sensitivity to the environment that you're in.
Yeah.
But without reducing the kind of passion that you feel towards the work. You come to it like as an educator, as somebody who's inviting folks to come and participate in something, as opposed to somebody who's like, now the youth will run.
Yeah, no, totally.
And it's really powerful to see it just kind of extend and emanate, youth run as an expression of you, because it is. And it really is community in the sense that you're not trying to put yourself at the tip of the sphere and be the most important person in the room, but you're consistently serving that role of a high quality educator, which is building the spaces with consideration as to how they're being built so that it can be grown in that sort of grassroots way that you talk about.
That's really nice. Thank you. Well, I feel like you've been someone who's been really helpful and reflective for me and with me of like helping me see back, like, especially when it comes to gratitude, of like, that is just like feeling appreciation and expressing that appreciation is like very much at the core of who I am. And I'm on like a mission right now of just like ensuring that like every time I'm grateful for something or every time I feel unconditional love and connection with someone, like just name it, like put that out into the world. And I think that has become like very much a part of the youth run culture, which I feel very excited and grateful for, that it's like this is the way that we approach each other is one of like appreciation for each other's presence and appreciation for one another's time and an appreciation for the conversation that happens when you're running 8 miles together or when you're doing a 5K together. Like there's just a lot of, at the core of it is like the opportunity to connect with other people and appreciation for that time and space.
I couldn't have said it better.
Well, it is my job.
Well, I appreciate you.
Oh, thanks.
And we've run 47 minutes.
Amazing. Wow.
I think that's a good place to wrap it.